No,
This meeting is being recorded.
that's not the password? No, sure.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming. Just a few housekeeping details. If you're looking for the agenda, it is in this event app, so if you haven't already, please make sure you download that. There's a lot of information in there that will tell you what room the sessions are in. That's where the handouts are available. Anything that's recorded, you'll be able to access after today. You'll be able to access the handouts from there. That's where you'll do the surveys, and there's also a really fun game. So if you're competitive, make sure you get in there. When you download it, the password is actually in all capitals, PA space SP Training 23. The SP Training 23 is all one word. So it's PA space SP Training 23. So this is where we're going to have all of our general sessions today, starting with Dana Kelly and 24-25 FAFSA. We will also be having lunch in here. We will be setting up signs for people to have lunch by sector so that the sector meetings can happen during lunch today. We've got a lot of exciting sessions planned. The sessions are down the hall the other way. And then the restrooms are, in between here, right outside of where you came up from the elevator or right by the registration. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with Dana Kelly. And if anybody has questions or needs help, you can identify the spring training staff by our baseball caps.
Except that my baseball cap is in my bag out there. I won't put it on, I promise. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kat Del Grosso. I work at College Up Student Loans, and I'm just going to introduce our speaker for what I'm sure you're all excited for this session. On Tuesday, when we did this out near Harrisburg, there were a lot of questions, and I think we probably could have talked for another hour or two. Anyway, without further ado, Dana Kelly currently serves as the Vice President of Professional Development and Institutional Compliance for NASFAA. In this role, she oversees all products and services assigned to the training and regulatory assistance and certification and credentialing departments, supervises DC-based and remote training staff, manages the annual Leadership and Legislative Conference and Expo, which they just held in February, and develops session content for NASFAA's National Conference. As a member of NASFAA's executive team, she is instrumental in ensuring NASFAA is working toward the vision, mission, and goals established by NASFAA's board of directors. Prior to working at NASFAA, she held positions at Nelnet Diversified Solutions as a national trainer, at Nelnet as a regional director, and at High Point University as the director of student financial planning. She holds a BS in Justice and Policy Studies from Guilford College, a master's degree from University of Phoenix in Organizational Management, and an MPA from University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Please welcome Dana Kelly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you here virtually. For those of you who saw this session earlier in the week, it'll be interesting. You're going to hear this from a little different perspective, probably. I know someone from our policy team handled it earlier. I have modified the slides just a little bit. As you just heard, we had a leadership conference in February, and we were fortunate that Department of Education actually came and gave us an update on FAFSA simplification. So I have modified this slideshow. Anytime you see font that is in green, those are some new tidbits that we picked up as a result of the leadership conference. So again, we will just jump right in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I think we all know how we got here. We've been talking about this since 2019 and early 2020, but it's definitely a huge undertaking for the Department of Education. There are 5 different systems that are having to be totally rebuilt. As you can imagine, that in and of itself is a huge job, but then you throw things into the mix like a pandemic, like loan forgiveness, fresh start, We had all kinds of things going on. So it's been a lift for our friends over at the department. And we are still not exactly sure where things are going to land. Some of the new information that we heard in DC a few weeks ago is that the date for the start of the FAFSA is a little bit up in the air at this point. We are pretty confident it is not going to happen on October 1st. Hopefully that is not news to any of you in the audience. Definitely, we recommend that you be thinking about contingency plans based on a later opening date for the 24-25 FAFSA. They told us the language they used was sometime in the fourth quarter. It runs from October 1st through December 31st. What is interesting here is that the requirement in the law is that the form be ready by the 1st of January. So they clearly have said they are working toward meeting the requirements of the law. So if I were a betting person, I would say this is going to be available maybe late in the fourth quarter, but certainly by January 1st. The other thing that we learned at the leadership conference is that there is a new process to accessing the data. We know that we have a simplified FAFSA form. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. But now there are a little bit of new requirements for accessing that form that have created some concern in the community. Anyone who is a contributor to the FAFSA is going to have to provide consent in order for the IRS information to be pulled. This is not a Department of Education requirement. This is a IRS requirement. So we are having to work. Well, Ed is having to work with the IRS in order to achieve our and the IRS way we're going to do it. So anyone who is a contributor on the form is going to have to provide consent to their tax information. The only place you have an exception is for a tax form that is filed married filing joint. In that case, only one of the individuals listed on the tax return is going to have to provide consent. Consent is an electronic process. Is going to invite the other contributors. It's going to require a social security number in order for them to do that invitation. So think about a high school night. You're working with a student. You get to the point in the form where the student is identifying the parents. We're going to talk a little bit more about a few other steps that happen there. But essentially, anyone that tax information is required, the student needs to enter their social security number, and then that's going to generate a pushed email to notify that individual that there is a FAFSA form out there that their consent in order for it to move forward. We also learned that you as the school are not going to be aware of FAFSAs that are in process. So you will never see them until everyone who is a contributor has provided consent and the form has been processed. So how is consent going to work? Once they get the invitation, they're going to utilize an FSA ID in order to provide the necessary consent. The department has assured us that they are working on creating an FSA ID that will be available to all people. If you think about it right now, we know there are some problems out there with the FSA ID, right? There are some people who can't use it, and you have some workarounds in place to deal with them. Those workarounds go away for 24-25. So just keep that in mind. The FSA ID is ready. As soon as we have information that it is set and ready to go, our friends over at NCAN have said they are going to be starting a campaign in the high schools to just get people to go ahead and get that FSA ID at a minimum. So they're ready to go whenever this happens. If there is any kind of a consent issue, so if there is one contributor who cannot use an electronic process for whatever reason, then a paper form is going to be required for everyone. So there are some rural areas where internet access may be a little sketchy. There are some individuals who, for whatever reason, don't even have an email address. So for these folks, the paper form is probably going to be required. Well, it will be. If they cannot get somewhere or do something to access the form electronically, then paper is there for everyone. FAA access is not going to allow you to help them. Again, you can't do any kind of initial application because of this consent issue. It has to start with the applicant or the student. And as I already mentioned, FAAs are not going to see the applications that are awaiting a contributor response. So that was a lot of new information. Now let's go over some of the things that we've already known for a while. I mentioned the form is going to be simpler, and it will be. No taxable income questions are going to be on the FAFSA. The way to think about this is this whole process is being built around the tax form. So if there is data, if it's not on the tax return, it's not going to be looked at. So that is how they have tried to simplify this process. So no taxable income questions on the FAFSA, fewer untaxed income questions factored into the formula. Child support received is now going to be reported with assets. I mentioned earlier with consent, there is a change to who is reported as the parent. So the student has to figure this out, right? The student has to know. Currently, it falls to whoever the student lives with the most. That's pretty easy for the student to figure out. Now, going forward, the parent who is providing the most financial support, irregardless of where the student lives, is the parent of record. So the parent wizard is going to help the student by posing a series of questions to help them identify who the parent of record is and should be, and essentially who the contributors to this application should be. So we are eagerly awaiting to see what that is going to look like, because we haven't seen any modeling on that yet. Family size, this is another one that will probably generate a groan in the audience. Family size is going to be based on dependents that are claimed on the tax return. Now, how often is that correct, right? People they're switching who claims dependents based on year, per divorce agreements. There's just a lot of potential for this number to be wrong. Department of Education knows that. Again, we're working around the tax return. So they are going to actually follow up with the student within the form. Once the data transfers in, it's going to ask the student to verify that this is correct, that these are the dependents on that these are correct. And if it's not, they will have the opportunity to adjust it. There are not going to be asset questions. For those who are eligible for a maximum Pell, any who qualify for mean tested benefits, any who have an income under $60,000 with no lettered schedules, or if they have a Schedule C and Schedule C is only showing a gain or a loss of less than $10,000. So a significant amount of students will not see any of those questions, which again simplifies the form. There are going to be new questions on race and sex. We have heard just recently that these questions are not actually going to be transferred to the school as part of the ICER. It's more for demographic collection on the department side to help them with some of their statistical questions. One of the questions that right now is off the FAFSA is the ability for the student to indicate where they're going to be housed while they are attending your school. So the housing question's been removed. There has been huge pushback from our community on how much you guys rely on that field. So we have been pushing pretty hard with the department. And again, we've heard recently that we're probably maybe going to get that question back. So we're hopeful. We will see what happens. The formula itself creates some changes. So we have the other important piece here that's happening, and I want you guys to think for a bit, and hopefully you already have been thinking a lot about this actually, is your students who are going to be caught in transition. They are at your school right now under the current formula, and they are going to transition to that new SAI going forward. And if they fall into any of these categories, there is the potential for some negative end results for those students. The number in college is a question that has been completely eliminated from the form. It will not be there. As a result, the income protection allowance has been increased. That is supposed to account for the differences for families who may have more than one individual in college. The reality is it's not going to help enough. So you have the potential for students who right now, if there's 2 in college, they may be qualifying for some Pell. That's definitely going to go away. So hopefully you are thinking about these potential populations on your campus and are considering what you're going to do to assist them, because they're going to go from being financially covered to potentially not being financially covered, even though nothing has changed in their world specifically. So the other thing that's gone is the state tax allowance. So states that have high tax rates, there was some protection built into the current formula to assist those folks. That's going to be gone. Students' available income is now allowed to be negative. That's a good thing. It helps get that SAI down even lower. And the small business and families farm exclusion has been eliminated. So if there are, I know there are farming communities in Pennsylvania, so potentially you could have some families who were impacted there as well by not being able to claim that exclusion. Let's see, as I've already referred to it a couple of times, our beloved EFC is gone away, fallen by the wayside. I had a lot of people ask me, why do they have to change the name? Why can't they just leave it alone? It's because expected family contribution is confusing to parents. It makes them think that is what has to be paid, when in effect, it is still sort of an index. It gives us a place to start. The student aid index is a better reflection of what that number actually is. So I've already mentioned no split for number in college. The SAI is not prorated for enrollment other than 9 months. And the SAI can be as low as a negative 1,500. This was another question we had answered with the department in February. A negative SAI would seem to say you can award above cost of attendance by $1,500. The answer is no, that is not the intent. You cannot exceed cost of attendance when packaging a negative SAI. So what's the point of the negative SAI? It's not doing anything. Essentially, all it's doing is letting you know this student is, by formula calculation, the neediest of the needy. So if you have your own institutional grants and scholarships that are limited, you may want to consider those individuals with negative SAIs before anyone else. That's essentially the only the thing that you're going to do with it, essentially. And again, the SAI is going to function just like the EFC, in that it is going to determine the eligibility for all Title IV aid, except maximum and minimum Pell Grant awards. And let's talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. We've also had some nomenclature changes to FAFSA simplification, a lot of those all over the place. NASFAA has some resources up that can help you identify where those nomenclature changes are. You don't have to do these in a rush, but you do need to get them done sometime in the next year. as far as your website goes. EFA, estimated financial assistance, is now offered financial assistance. Combat pay is no longer excluded. Emergency aid is now excluded. So that's good news. We've had lots and lots of questions on EFA, especially since it's being generated most of the time in areas on your campus outside of financial aid. So that's good news. Verification, still a bit of a question mark. Ed is not really sure what data elements are going to be verified. Logic would say that potentially anytime something has to be manually entered, that may be where they land in terms of verification, but they just are not sure. They want a full year of data into the new system before they make any determinations. So 24-25 is going to be completely and totally random when it comes to verification. Year-round Pell, half-time enrollment no longer required. So that's great. A student can come in and take a course in summer and still use Pell to pay for it as part of their third Pell of the year. The restoration of Pell Grant eligibility to incarcerated students is actually already on the books for 23-24. Pell now can be prorated. This is another change. Before, if you were less than half-time, you couldn't get anything. You couldn't get any Pell if you fell below 10% of whatever the maximum was. Now you're going to be able to prorate based on the actual credits the student is taking, so that those students do get a little bit of Pell in those situations. And we had an expansion of Pell LEU in circumstances, primarily closed schools, things of that sort, where any Pell that was used is going to go back into that total and not be counted against the student based on circumstances around the school they attended. So we are at a situation where we have a menu of Pell. We have Pell 3 ways, and it depends on where the student falls as to which Pell that they will get. Maximum Pell goes to anyone who is a non-filer, dependent or independent, children of certain deceased veterans and public safety officers. This is one where I know I have a question, because I am very curious how these individuals are going to be identified, or if they are self-identifying. But students under the age of 33 who lost a parent in the armed forces after 9/11, or whose parent died in the line of duty as a public safety officer, are going to get max Pell. Low income students. So here are where many of our new Pell students are going to come into play, because now, instead of a very complicated analysis, we have a pretty straightforward need analysis calculation. So it is the number of family members, the AGI associated with either the parent or the student, depending on dependent or independent, and that's going to be compared against the poverty level in varying percentages. So for independent students who are single, they're going to take 225% of the poverty level up against that AGI and family size. Dependent children of a single parent whose AGI is less than 225% of the poverty level will get max Pell. Independent students who are not single parents still have a pretty good chance of getting Pell, as if their AGI is below 175% of the poverty level. And dependent students whose parents are not single parents, that percentage is also 175%. So you are able to essentially use a chart. I'm going to show you an example of one here in just a minute, that will answer what is the highest adjusted gross income a family could have and still qualify for Pell. You're going to be able to answer that question for the student. In today's world, there's no way you could do it because there are too many variables that are going into the calculation. But this is a very straightforward calculation. So that is something that you're going to be able to discuss with students. Along those lines, we've had people concerned that there aren't going to be Pell charts anymore. You don't need the Pell chart because the calculation is so straightforward. However, again, we have been talking to the department. We have been letting them know, people really would like a Pell chart. You are going to get a Pell chart, we're pretty sure, but it is a reference document only. It is not going to be fed into your FAM system. It is not going to be used in awarding. It is mainly there for you to help explain to families how Pell is arrived at and whether or not they may qualify. So more to come on that. So how does this all work? We've got Pell 3 ways. What is it? How do we do this? First, the student is going to be considered for a maximum Pell. So that's based again on the number of parents in the household. Notice I just said parents. We're going to come back to this in a second. And the AGI versus the poverty level multiplier. Poverty level multiplier is associated with the tax year in which we're working with. If there is no qualification for a maximum Pell, then the way you arrive at it is very straightforward. You simply take the max Pell amount and you subtract from it the student's SAI, and that's going to equal the Pell that they receive. So again, in this situation, if there's no max Pell and no award from the SAI calculation itself, the student can be considered for a minimum Pell. And that is it's the same calculation with a lower percentage on that poverty level multiplier. So again, it's parents in the household and AGI versus that multiplier. So maximum, calculated, and minimum. That's going to be the order of operations for Pell Grants. And again, here is the chart that I mentioned that will show you income levels that allow for this calculation to occur. I will note there is a different chart for, I believe it's Hawaii and Alaska. So there are 3 different poverty level charts that you'll be working with as you move through working with Pell for these students. But again, your systems are going to have these. So you shouldn't be doing a lot of this manually. Provisions that are already implemented. We did away with selective service. In 23-24, we should be eliminating all of those 390 codes because the FAFSA is actually going to catch up with what has happened in the law. No more prior drug convictions to worry about, and we eliminated the 150% rule for direct lending, all of which were wonderful things for our community. We have things that are on the books for 23-24, changes to PJ, changes to cost of attendance, provisional independent student status, the expansion of Pell, the extended acceptable documentation for unaccompanied homeless youth, and Pell Grants for prison education programs. I'm going to get into these pretty quickly, so I want to make sure we have as much time for questions as possible. For PJ, so what's changing? Right now, 23-24, the year we are headed into, it'll be here before you know it. Those students will be on your campus. You cannot have a policy of not doing PJ or a policy that says, everybody's denied, we don't do it. That's gone away. You must have a policy. I don't think there are many schools who are actually doing this, but there were a few. So now this policy is in place. We had a change in how unsub eligibility for a dependent student is determined. You see that second bullet there, the FAA would determine that the parents of the student ended support or would not fill out the FAFSA. This in current year or 22-23, this is an and statement. So you had to verify both of those things in order to push out unsub. Now it's one or the other, not both. Also, during a qualifying emergency, you have the ability to zero out income earned from work with documentation of unemployment. We have always in my memory gotten a DCL that essentially says this anytime there is a national emergency. Now we've just eliminated the step of needing that DCL. You guys know you can just do it. Also, there is now the requirement to carry forward dependency overrides from a prior year. This is also true for homeless as well. So notice it says requirement. That means you're not going out and verifying anything having to do with the dependency override unless you are presented with information that makes you think potentially something has changed. So same is going to be true for homeless, all right? You just assume their department is saying, we don't need you to verify this, so don't verify it, okay? Provisional independent status. Here's an interesting one. All right, so the Consolidated Appropriations Act gives students the ability to decide for themselves that they think they are potentially eligible for a dependency override, even though they cannot answer yes to any of the dependency questions. This is actually on the books for 23-24, okay? 24-25 is going to give you the technical support to identify these students. But for 23-24, you still have to identify them, and you still need to push out your processes around PJ in a reasonable amount of time for anyone who has a rejected FAFSA due to no parent information on the form. Okay, so initially we thought this one was not happening, that it was not going to be in place until we had the tech support that will come in 24-25 that will actually automatically identify these students for you. But no, this is supposed to be happening right now. So as you were getting applications in that are rejected, you should be pushing out your PJ processes to these students right away. Okay, hopefully everybody is clear on that. If you haven't been doing it, definitely start doing it as soon as possible. Figure out a way to pull a report that identifies these students so that you can push out this information. This is it's a good news, bad news thing for aid administrators, in that it does allow you to be proactive where these students are concerned. And for this year, there isn't really anything happening that would make a student think that, yeah, they're going to get more money. Next year, with those technical improvements that identify these students for you, these students are also going to be told they'll get an SAI. Right now, the way that it's working is they get a rejected FAFSA. There's no EFC, there's no indication of anything. Next year, for 24-25, these students will get an SAI, and if that SAI makes them Pell eligible, they will be told a Pell Grant amount associated with that SAI, again, with the guidelines that the school is going to be reaching out to them to let them know what they need to do to ensure that they are in fact eligible for a dependency override. So you all will get the opportunity to tell these students that they either do or do not qualify for the Pell Grant that was shown to them as a part of their process. So a lot happening with provisional independent student status. Cost of attendance, also a lot happening. And it's probably good that this is happening in 23-24 because there's already a lot that you're going to have to deal with in 24-25. So we can get this one taken care of this year and have it done and understood and under the belt, so to speak, and taken care of. So for cost of attendance, we've had significant changes. I will tell you that I can do a full hour session on cost of attendance. There are that many changes. We don't have time to do all of those today. So again, I recommend you go out to our website. We have some charts listed on our FAFSA simplification area of our website, and you can see all of the nitty gritty, all of the separate details of everything that's going on. So I would recommend that you do that. These are the big ones. Food allowance must provide the equivalent of at least 3 meals per day. Okay, that is not saying that your institution is required to have a 21 meal plan. You don't have to. You just have to make sure when you're building your cost of attendance that you have accounted for such a plan. So if you, let's just say, for example, your school has a 17 meal plan. One way you may derive what your 3 meals per day are would be just to figure out what the individual meal cost is for that plan, right? That's pretty easy to do. This is fairly straightforward math. And then you're just going to extrapolate out and get that individual meal cost, multiply it by 21, and then multiply that by the number of weeks in your term. And that is one way to arrive at that status. If it is reasonable, if you have a really, really good contract with Aramark or whoever is providing your meal service on campus, it really may not be reasonable. So you need to consider that as well. You are going to have an idea of what is reasonable because you're also going to have to figure this out for your off-campus population. So you can use surveys, you can use information that is available. You may want to start looking on maybe Chamber of Commerce websites or economic resources around your municipality, town, wherever you are, to try to find this information to help you build this out. But you do need to do that. Documentation is really, really important, and you're going to see why here in just a minute. Don't forget to do this for your students living with parents as well. Okay, they are treated now essentially the same as everyone else. You have got to come up with a meal cost, and it can't just be 1 meal per day while they're on campus. All right, they get the same 3 meals per day that everybody else gets. You also are not allowed to zero out their housing cost because they live with mom and dad now. You must accommodate that. You must come up with it somehow using public information, student surveys. The department's not prescriptive on how you're doing this, but they want you to do it. So documentation is important on all of these. Your on-campus housing. The allowance here has to be the greater of either the average or the median cost assessed. Another very new thing that I know everyone is not used to doing. One thing you'll notice here is that actual cost is not allowed. Actual cost is not referenced in the law or the regulation or the sub-regulatory guidance. In order to get at actual housing costs, if that's what you want to use, you would need to run the median and the average on a specific dorm. And it should come out to be, I would think the only way this gets really messed up is if your single rooms are actually assessed at a higher amount than a normal 2-person room or 4-person suite, or however you make that, however it's working. So, but by and large, we think most of the time when you run an average on an individual residence hall, it's probably going to be the median that comes out as the higher cost, and the median should be your actual assessed charges. So again, no prescription on how you do this. You can, you could, if you were so inclined, take all of your housing components, all of the costs associated with all of your residence halls, add them up, get an average, and then also run the median for that group. And that can be what goes into your cost of attendance for housing. Just want to caution you to make it as realistic as it can be. So use your data and look at what your costs are across the board. You don't want to go too low with your, cost of attendance, because then you may have a line of students coming in requesting professional judgment adjustments based on housing cost. So you don't want that. You want to try to get it as accurate as it can be. So look at what the majority of your students are doing, and look at your processes to come up with that number, so that, again, you're kind of you truly are hitting on the average for most of your students. Also new, the cost of attendance must include the one-time cost of obtaining a student's first professional licensure. Now, this one creates some confusion. The cost does have to occur within the academic year or the award year or the period of enrollment for this student. So, but it doesn't mean they're taking the test necessarily, or the licensure exam, or whatever it is they're doing. Doesn't mean they're doing it in the period of enrollment. It might come later. So if they are paying for their nursing board licensure in their last semester of college, but they're not taking that exam until a month after they graduate, that is fine. That cost needs to be included in the cost of attendance. So what does this mean for you as an aid officer? It means you've got to be familiar with all of the programs that are offered on your campus, so that you know where you have students who potentially fall into this area. You're going to need to work with faculty to have an understanding of who is actually paying for this licensure while they are enrolled with you. Also, there is no limit now on how many times a certification or something of that sort that's associated with the program, even if it's optional, can be taken. If a student makes you aware, they can do that as many times as they like, unless you set a policy that says we're only going to allow you to have 2 certificates, 2 optional certificates associated, and those are the ones we're going to pay for. So that is now out there. This is the one that's causing a lot of headache. This next one, cost of attendance elements are required to be disclosed anywhere tuition and fees are described on your institution's website. So what does that mean exactly? The intent of this item in the law is clearly transparency. The Department of Ed wants a student to know what it costs, both direct and indirect, to attend your school for a year. Normally, the tuition and fee page is something that is handled by your business office, I am guessing. So you're going to want to work with your business office and let them know, and let everybody know on campus, that anytime we are using a dollar amount, NASFAA's had some off-the-record conversations with Ed. There are definitely things that we don't want to ask necessarily, because we may not like the answer, so we don't want to ask yet. We said, what are you meaning here? If a student is saying, on average, we keep our tuition costs below the national average, they use the word tuition there. Does that mean we now have to list out all of our costs because we said tuition? No, that is not what is meant by described. Described means a numerical value. So if you are showing the cost per credit, if you are showing the cost for a semester, you've got to list out all the other components. You cannot link to them. They must be listed out. There should be no clicks to go from seeing tuition and fees to then seeing what the full cost of attendance breakdown is. So you've got to have them fully listed out. Potentially, there could be, depending on program, you might have lots and lots of student budgets. Again, the department has not been prescriptive here, other than saying whenever there is a described tuition and fees, they want to see everything else. So work with your campus to figure out how to do this, what makes the best sense. We also know already that, all of the costs are supposed to be listed associated with the program anyway. So maybe one way to look at this is, again, looking at your data. What are most of your students doing? Are most of your students falling within, are most of your programs falling within the same general cost of attendance? And we've got a few outliers, like certainly like an English major, a history major, a math major. They probably all have the same cost of attendance. But then you throw in nursing, or you throw in fine arts, you throw in interior design, things where the student has to purchase materials or equipment that go beyond what the average student is doing. Maybe it's that average, that sweet spot in the middle where most of your majors are, that gets published on your tuition and fee page. And then maybe you do those others specific to the program webpage on your campus. Again, that's just an idea. There is no prescription. The other thing I'll mention about cost of attendance is that now the department has the ability to regulate cost of attendance. We don't want them to do much around this area, right? The less prescriptive they can be, the better we like it. So if we don't want a lot of regulation, we need to try to live up to the intent of this law, and that is transparency. So take that back to your campus, work with those who have control on what is happening within your website, and make sure that this is happening so that we don't get any more prescriptive than what we currently have around what has to be disclosed. Expansion of Pell LEU restoration. This one's pretty straightforward. We don't think we need to spend a lot of time here, but essentially if a student is in a situation where they're not able to complete based on something that has nothing to do with them, they have the ability to get that Pell that's been utilized restored back to the Pell LEU. Pell Grant for Prison Education Programs, or PEPs, is also in effect now. I think there will be, if there's not already, application out there for schools to apply to participate. You do have to apply and be accepted to work in this area. You can't just go down to, the local jail, prison, whatever, and say, hey, we want to educate your population. Doesn't work that way. You do have to go through Department of Ed and be approved to do this. Timeline here, again, all of these things that are 23-24 will turn green as of July 1. Many of them, because of their nature, mean you need to be working on them now so that it is essentially done by the time July 1 rolls around, because it is imperative to your processes as we work ahead of the actual start of the award year. So how is the Pell Grant formula going to affect students? This chart shows if we ran all of our 2016 data through the program or through the new calculation, 41% of everyone who applies would get an automatic Pell. 10% would get a calculated maximum Pell. 5% would get some form of Pell. 11% would get minimum Pell. Only 32% of the applicants in 2016 would not get any Pell Grant. So this slide shows you that there is a lot more money going out there. A lot more people are going to qualify for Pell. I mentioned earlier that there are some folks that are going to be on your campus who are going to be negatively impacted by this. This chart shows you the winners and losers, so to speak. In pink, where you see the pink, those are the losers. So 13% of students who are dependent, that fall with an adjusted gross income for their family between 38 and 75. Actually, just take that 38 to 125,000 are going to potentially lose. These are our students that have more than one in college, that live on a family farm, or that live in like the Northeast where there's an extremely high tax rate assessed to individuals. Opposite to that, anytime you see blue or gold, those are either increases to Pell for those people or brand new Pell awards. So the blue would be someone who had an increase to a Pell Grant of more than $500. And the gold or yellow on your screen are brand new students who've never had Pell, who are now going to qualify. So if you take a look at that $75,000 to $125,000 adjusted gross income, you've got an 8% increase for students who've never had Pell, who now will have Pell. Hopefully, the other thing that is happening in your mind as you see this is if you have any kind of a Pell matching grant, or you have award policies that are built around need, which I think probably many of you do, you're going to need a bigger budget because there are going to be more people who qualify. Either way you go. So certainly if you have a matching grant, you're going to need more money. If you have an awarding policy where you're meeting full need, there are going to be a lot more students showing need. So that's going to increase your budget dollars there. Let's see. I mentioned that NASFAA does have a web center around this. You see the website here on this slide. I will be happy to share this slide deck with your organizers if I haven't already, so that you all have this slideshow and can use these built-in links. We also have a modeling tool. Based on the budget situation that I just described, it's probably a really good idea for you to, again, look at your data and have an understanding of what the impact is going to be. How much more money are you going to need to support your current packaging models? Or if there is no more money, then you have the discussion around what are the changes we're going to make to our packaging policies. So really, really important, really critical. You still have a little more time to do this, but I know it's budget season for you all is either upon you or right around the corner. So this is a good thing to be doing. I've also included in this presentation some case studies that we did. And they essentially show you winners and losers. The one that I want to bring to your attention, though, is, let me find it, this one. I mentioned before that in order to qualify for a maximum Pell, you're looking at household size and parent AGI. One thing that is missing that normally you have looked at is a student contribution for Pell. Student income and assets are not a consideration when we are looking at a max Pell situation. So this scenario shows it pretty clearly. You have a dependent student whose parent is not married. So there's two in the household, one in college. The parent income is $27,000. The student income is $196,000. Potentially think of the star athlete on your campus who is now able to be compensated while they are in school. It's not an unusual number, believe it or not, for some of these students. So they've got $196,000. They have assets of $6,000. EFC calculation would have come up with a $61,000 EFC. In our new world, this student's SAI is 0 because that $196,000 is not looked at. All right, so just want to make sure you guys are aware that student income, student assets are not a part of a max Pell calculation. All right. As always, you have the ability to utilize PJ if you are so inclined to create more equity in terms of how you are dealing with your resources, but that Pell is never going to go away. You could, again, you could use PJ, get back to that $61,000 figure by putting income back into the calculation using the SAI, but the Pell Grant remains. All right, and again, I don't think we need to look at the case studies. We have, what, about 11 minutes that we can take some questions, if there are any.
Okay, thanks, Dana. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, we got questions. Dana, we're getting, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're passing the mics around just so it's easier.
No problem.
I have a question. It's about the number in college being removed from the FAFSA. I think you said it would be removed. My understanding is it will still be there, but not used in the calculation, which is correct.
What I just asked this question specifically of our policy team. We actually have a couple of people who have been a part of the build of this new application. And when I asked, they told me that that is not going to be there, period, that question is totally eliminated. So I am going by what I was told there, but that was my understanding, is that it is not even on the form. Even if it were on the form, you couldn't, it wouldn't be a part of the calculation. So even if I am incorrect and it's there, it is not a part of the calculation. So with PJ going in there and increasing that number wouldn't do anything. But because that was my assumption, and when I asked our policy area, I was told, no, that question's not even there. So schools will not even have the opportunity to use it incorrectly in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Dana, in the interim, I don't know if you saw the question in the chat.
Yes.
But negative SAI doesn't increase COA, but does it increase need? Example for subsidized direct loans. Can you answer that in the meantime?
It does not, in that you are still bound by that cost of attendance. So your direct loan aggregates are what they are. They're, your annual and your maximums still has to fall within that COA range. So it really has no impact for direct loans either.
Thank you. Okay, we have George Santucci.
Hi, George Santucci from Glen Park University. The question I have is with this student trying to be independent and not including the parental income. So right now for this year, the FAFSA data comes back where it's not going to produce an EFC, so we go out and request the information, to determine their eligibility. You're saying for 24-25, they're going to be given a student aid index number. So are they going to be still part of the verification process with some type of code to say that we still have to go get the information to determine their eligibility? Or if we don't receive that and we just let them all go, are we held accountable for letting them all go without verifying that status, that situation?
You must verify that status in either situation. You're doing it this year for any rejected ICERs that come into your system that are rejected solely because of a lack of parental information. You have to proactively assume that this student wants a dependency override. Your language your language, for example, is not, hey, you forgot to put your parent information on this form. We need you to do that in order to process it. That is not the communication that you're sending out. You're sending out it appears you think you are eligible for a dependency override because parent information was not included on your tax form. This is our policy. These are the types of things we need you to document, et cetera, et cetera. So that is what is happening proactively for 2023 or 23-24. In 24-25, the student aid report is going to give you an indication that says, hey, you have a provisional independent student here, send out your PJ information to this student. So the answer to your question is yes, you have to verify and or you have to assume PJ, assume a dependency override, and then verify that the dependency override either is or isn't going to work for this. And
Okay, so we'll be notified somehow that this is provisional and we go through that process. I'm just making sure that we're going to be notified somehow, rather than.
you're not this year. Okay. No notification for you you're still required to do this for 23-24.
Correct.
Right now, FAFSA that you're coming in, there is no notification for this year, but going forward in 24-25, there will be an indicator, a comment code, something on that ICER that lets you know this is a provisional independent student.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Kurt Deutsch. I'm with FIA. I'm a higher education access partner. Quick question on, determining what Pell they would get. I know it was the maximum Pell minus the SAI equals the Pell amount that they would get. If they have a positive 1,500, they would be, subtracting that from the maximum Pell. But if they had a negative 1,500, and because it's subtracting a negative 1,500, essentially you'd be adding 1,500, but I don't think that's correct. They'd be getting more Pell than the maximum amount that way.
Sure. In that situation, that student that has the negative SAI is always going to be granted the max Pell. You would never be calculating Pell for that student because they're always going to be eligible for the max Pell first.
Okay, so they wouldn't get more than the max Pell if they have a negative number.
No, the max Pell is the max Pell. All right. So the calculated Pell doesn't come into play for a student. You would never get to that step. If you're thinking about the order of operations for Pell Grants, any student who has a negative SAI is automatically going to get a maximum Pell. No, nothing else happens. There is no additional calculation. Nothing happens for the school in terms of having to calculate that Pell. They get the max. They meet one of those criteria that says, boom, you get it right away. Nothing else, we stop. There is no proceeding to those other opportunities to calculate Pell because they've already gotten the maximum out of the gate.
Have another one coming, Dana.
Sure.
Hi, Dana. I was wondering if you could go back and talk about the contributors and them completing the paper application.
Sure. So the way that the process is going to work is a student is going to sit down and apply. As they are going through the application, they are going to hit up against that parent wizard. The parent wizard is going to help them identify who the parent is supposed to be or who the contributors are supposed to be on the FAFSA, depending on where the student sits, right? Are they a dependent student? Are they an independent student? Either way, they'll be directed appropriately through the form to identify who the contributors are. Once they have that, then they're going to need to know the social security number for those contributors, and they're going to add them to the form. They'll continue on through the form, put all of the rest of their information in, and they're done. They sign the form then looks at who has been identified as a contributor and pushes out a notification that says, hey, you've been identified as a contributor on John Smith's application. We need you to go in and provide consent in order to get this application processed. So the parent or contributor, most likely the parent, gets the email, they go in, they're directed to their FSA ID to provide consent. Only when all contributors have gone through that step does the form get processed, and the institutions that have been identified One other thing we did learn is that now a student can put 20 colleges on the FAFSA form right out of the gate instead of just 10. So at that point, once all contributors have provided consent, the application process and it goes. Follow up?
Yeah, you had mentioned that if a parent, the instance where a parent would have to complete the paper application.
Yes. So for example, if a parent cannot use an if a parent has a status or if a parent cannot go in using a computer system to deal with consent, then the only option becomes a paper form. So that the application that student started would sit there forever and ever and ever if there was no electronic follow-up by a contributor. So if a parent cannot access the internet, then the form would have to be done manually and mailed in. Those are the only options there. Again, we are hopeful that the FSA ID is going to be updated such that all parents can use it or all people can use it. In the situation where you may have someone who is not a U.S. citizen and does not have a social security number, you are still going to continue to put all zeros. So that the student is going to need to be counseled that when that is the situation, they're entering all zeros. They're the contributor in that case. And then I'm still not quite sure how this is going to work, because if you have 1,000 people out there with all zeros as the and how you're going to distinguish one from the other. But the department has said they are going to figure this out and that we will have an FSA ID process that will work for all people. But in the event that there cannot be completion using electronic processes, then it means the student has to start over, has to do the paper form, and then the paper form has to be completed by all of the contributors and mailed in at that point. So again, we don't have a lot of information. That is what I know on how this process will work. But we heard from Ed in February that if for whatever reason the electronic process can't be completed, then a paper form becomes required for all parties. They're not going to be doing any kind of matching. The audience is muted, so I can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. If a student, an applicant or a parent does not give consent to have their tax information shared, do they have the opportunity to manually input that into the application?
Again, if consent cannot be obtained, then that application is not going to move forward. That potentially becomes a judgment situation all on its own, and those, if it's somebody who's not going to cooperate, then that student would become the unsub only applicant. And I believe, that's a great question. I don't know that I've heard process explained on what's going to happen if a parent refuses, how that form gets processed. What they're telling us, it just their consent is not provided. So that is I think a great question, and one that is to be determined, because there is based on my understanding of how the process is working, there would be no mechanism to move that form forward unless the student then completed the paper application and mailed it in, because consent would be needed for it to move forward. The other thing I will mention about consent, since you brought this up, is consent can be rescinded at any time by anybody. We are still waiting on what that means. So if consent is rescinded after you've made a first disbursement, but before you've made a second disbursement, my take, based on just how the department is doing everything else, is that you would not be liable for any disbursement that was made when you had consent, but that no disbursements would be allowed going forward. We are actually pushing the department, our policy area is pushing to say, no, the way we're interpreting that is if they get consent at any point, they have packaged and moved forward, and nothing, just disbursements should happen per normal for the rest of that award year. I feel like we are not going to be successful with that attempt, and that the best case scenario for us will be no further disbursements are allowed whenever consent is rescinded. Worst case scenario would be consent's rescinded, this student is now not eligible, which would be horrible. So I don't think they'll go that route. But we are still waiting to see what exactly the impact will be if consent is rescinded by any party during this process.
Okay, thanks, Tina. So I think we are a little over time. And do we have, was there a burning question? I know we're going to have the prisoner education program session and the cost of attendance session. And so we have some additional breakouts for those things, and we can all be talking throughout the day. The presentations are going to be posted if they aren't already. So if we've received the presentations, Dan Ray has already posted them under FAFSA events. We might have a straggler or two presentation coming in, so you can keep checking back for that. In the meantime, let's, Dana, thank you so much. And we're going to head on to our breakout sessions. Everyone's clapping for you.
Thank you all.